Hello, my name is Ivia Cardozo, and I'm an attorney with the Microenterprise Project at Volunteers of Legal Service. The Microenterprise Project provides free transactional legal services to small business owners based in New York City. We assist with issues such as drafting business contracts, forming a legal entity, employment law issues, and commercial leasing. For example, we can help advise and negotiate new leases, renewal leases, amendments, and termination agreements, as well as review your lease agreement to help you understand your rights and options as a commercial tenant. If you own a small business based in New York City that is not a franchise and you are income qualified, you may be eligible for our services. You can contact our project via our hotline at 347-521-5729 or email us at microenterprise@volsprobono.org. This video is intended to address frequently asked questions small businesses are having related to their commercial leases during this state of emergency. Because your legal relationship with your landlord is generally governed by the terms of your commercial lease, I recommend consulting with a lawyer to analyze what your specific options are. You most likely still need to pay your rent and otherwise comply with your lease obligations because there is no suspension of rent policy in effect at any level of government right now. In general, your rights and obligations as a commercial tenant are found within your lease agreement. Unless the law changes or your lease specifically states otherwise, you will have to negotiate an agreement with your landlord regarding your options for not paying rent or for paying less rent during this period of time. You may have heard that your lease might contain language that excuses the performance of lease obligations in events of pandemics, disasters, or governmental action. If your lease contains this language, you should have it reviewed by a lawyer. While you may have an argument that this language excuses you from paying rent, the courts construe these clauses very narrowly, which is why you should obtain legal advice to assess your specific lease. You may have heard also that there might be a bill or legislation passed to cancel rent payments for residential and small business tenants struggling during this emergency. However, no legislation has been passed yet, so at the moment there are no laws in place for the suspension of rent payments. Currently, there is a 90-day moratorium on evictions in New York State as of March 20th until at least June 20th, meaning that all eviction cases and warrants of eviction for not paying rent, including commercial evictions, are suspended. And if you have a case already filed against you, the courts have been instructed to put it on hold. So no judgments will be issued and no evictions can actually be performed by a marshal until at least June 19th. However, if you do fall behind on rent, your landlord may be able to file a new case against you in court whenever courts start accepting new filings and seek the back rent that you owe or evict you unless the law currently changes. We do not know yet when courts will begin accepting new filings, and it could be before the eviction moratorium expires, but at the moment it's unclear. Unless agreed to otherwise with your landlord, you will likely have to continue paying property taxes and utilities, additional rent, as required by your lease. If you pay utilities directly to your providers like Con Edison or National Grid, you may be able to contact them directly to negotiate a payment plan. If you are subject to a verbal agreement or never signed a renewal lease when your previous lease expired, in general, you're considered what's called a month-to-month tenant or a monthly tenant. As a monthly tenant, you and your landlord have the right to terminate your lease at any point by just providing 30-day notice to the other party, and you most likely still have to continue to pay rent until an agreement or a termination is otherwise agreed to with your landlord. We recommend that you initiate conversations with your landlord about the difficulties your business is having as soon as possible as a result of COVID-19 and the state of emergency, and focus on explaining why both of your interests should be aligned during this period so that both parties can come out of this crisis together and intact. Many landlords have already been contacted by tenants requesting leniency during this period, so they should already be aware of the issues you're facing as a small business. If you are able to reach an agreement, you should get it in writing, even if it's via email, and ideally have it signed by both parties. However, landlords may be hesitant to agree to anything in writing, so it can be helpful at the very least to memorialize the verbal agreement that you reach with your landlord in a follow-up email. If you want to cancel your lease before its natural expiration, depending on the provisions in your lease, you will likely have to negotiate something with your landlord. If you do not come to an agreement with your landlord, you may be subject to penalties or personal liability under the lease for not following through with your lease obligations, especially if you signed a personal guarantee when you signed your lease. If your landlord is willing to negotiate, they may be willing to waive or reduce any penalties that might otherwise be applicable for terminating your lease early. If your lease, on the very rare occasion, happens to have an early termination right within it, then you should then follow the required terms that are stated in that provision for exercising your right to terminate early. You most likely still need to pay your rent and otherwise comply with your lease obligations when your landlord hasn't responded to you. Until an agreement is otherwise reached with your landlord, you're still obligated under your lease to perform the various obligations that you have. If you've tried different forms of communication to contact your landlord, phone, mail, email, and they still haven't responded, you should consult with an attorney to understand what your options are and to see how else you can communicate with your landlord.